Tears of Metal follows a medieval Scottish clan engaged in a desperate struggle against a strange invading army. The attack came shortly after the fall of the Dragon Meteor, a phenomenon that has already warped the land in dangerous ways. As the leader of the last active battalion, your objective is to repel the invaders while trying to figure out how the invading army and the Dragon Meteor are connected. Now, hack-and-slash combat lies at the heart of Tears of Metal, with the player character carving a swath through Norman-inspired enemies with his claymore. The player isn't alone in this effort, other warriors will join over the course of the game. The game will feature co-op gameplay, so anyone with friends won't have to rely on the good sense of computer-controlled allies more than is absolutely necessary. As with its forerunners, there are also RPG and simulation elements to Tears of Metal. Between skirmishes, the player has the opportunity to recruit new warriors, purchase and activate new powers, and obtain long-term upgrades for the army. There is also a chance for the protagonist to get patched up after an unsuccessful attack, but note that this is only an option for the army leader. Other characters are bound by the iron law of the roguelike, staying dead once they fall. Hollywood Animal puts the player in charge of an early 20th century film studio with everything that entails. This includes the usual sim game mechanics, building sets, hiring personnel, researching new ideas, and managing the budget. However, as a game focused on Hollywood, it includes additional layers specific to the entertainment industry. The player takes a hands-on role in the film production process, from designing a script using plot cards, to planning out shooting schedules, to making distribution and marketing deals. But this is just the public side of the story. The game is set in the age of the Hollywood fixer, and this is a role that the player must assume as well. One has the option to cultivate relations with a wide range of shady groups, making friends with the mafia in exchange for personal favors, or taking money from hostile foreign governments looking to push propaganda. This darker side of the business carries over to the day-to-day operations as well. Aside from the usual misadventures, production can be derailed by anything from the sudden appearance of an actor's pregnant mistress to the revelation that some of your writers are communists, and you'll have to deal with all of it, legitimately or by other means. Rai is a warrior in an age of airships, caught in a conflict between the nobility and a band of pirates. Out of the blue, he is contacted by a mysterious woman named Arya, who hails from a distant time. Unbeknownst to him, Rai is part of a legendary order known as the Time Knights, pledged to protect the threads of fate that dictate all of history. And so begins a journey across time, leading from an age before civilization to a bizarre neon-drenched future. Now, only a little has been revealed about the combat system in Threads of Time. It will be turn-based, though it isn't yet clear if this will be a true turn-based system or a semi-real-time system as in the Super Nintendo RPGs that inspired it. It will also feature an emphasis on team-up attacks, much like the dual and triple attacks in Chrono Trigger, its most direct predecessor. The visual design in Threads of Time is particularly striking. While it's meant to have a retro aesthetic, this is achieved using the UT5 engine, allowing for a far broader range of effects than most RPG engines can manage. And the developers are using this to full effect. With a combination of high-detail pixel art, photorealistic backgrounds, and traditional animation, it features a look that is at once eclectic and classic. Young Ainhua didn't know what she was getting into with the Baraka Fair. What should have been fun in games has turned into a deadly gauntlet full of traps, killer clowns, and ghosts, all set in motion by the evil witch that's secretly running the show. Getting out in one piece will mean working with some of the friendlier carnies to find a way through Baraka's killer attractions. Baraka's primary gameplay is a top-down action puzzle game resembling a lot of hybrid puzzle titles from the 90s. Ainhua collects toys that can be used to solve puzzles and incapacitate or defeat enemies. That's just the core gameplay, though. Many of the attractions feature completely different gameplay styles, such as a driving-oriented bumper car challenge or a merry-go-round that turns into a horizontally scrolling shooter. But it's obviously Baraka's visual design that's the most striking aspect here. The game employs a blend of different animation techniques to create a world that looks like no other game out there. Most character animations are based on stop motion, but this isn't your old school claymation. Those animations are still fluid with lots of detail. The result is a game that feels like it has a material reality beyond the screen. The city of Phenopolis is ruled by sound in a very literal way. Loudspeakers throughout the city issue a constant stream of commands which the citizens are powerless to resist. One day, an insignificant young man named Felix finds himself not only immune to the loudspeakers, but aware of their effects. Now a threat to the prevailing order, he must elude capture while seeking a way to end the tyranny of sound before the leader's secret plan can go into effect. The player's task here is to manipulate objects in order to help Felix navigate Phonopolis and avoid the city guard. Many puzzle solutions will take advantage of the nature of the cardboard world. This may mean peeling a layer off of an object to reveal secrets underneath, or moving chunks of the city around. The player can also gain control of the loudspeakers, using them to direct the actions of the citizens. But, once again, it is the visual aesthetic that is the central feature. In contrast to the dim and dismal style usually associated with dystopian fiction, Phonopolis is colorful and surreal. The game draws upon interwar and Soviet-era art styles for inspiration, particularly those associated with the Russian avant-garde. Combined with its use of stop motion, this gives Phonopolis a look that's caught between realistic and surrealistic. Screenbound is a puzzle platformer, or more precisely, it's two puzzle platformers, one in 2D, one in 3D, that one is playing at the same time. The main character is walking, running, and jumping through 3D space while also playing a game on a handheld system. The controls are not separate. The 2D and 3D characters are controlled simultaneously with the exact same buttons. Normally, the two worlds are tightly connected, so if it's good to jump in the 2D game within a game, it's also good to jump in the 3D game. However, the two will diverge at times, forcing the player to temporarily focus on one over the other. At these moments, it's still necessary to pay attention to both to keep from, say, walking the 3D character off a cliff while helping the 2D character navigate a tricky section. As you may have figured out, skills like multitasking, problem solving, and attention switching are just as important as hand-eye coordination. Screenbound also promises a complete level designer, but don't worry about figuring out the two games at once concept. The player only builds the 2D levels. After that, the game can generate a 3D level to match it. Glum is advertised as a first-person booter, an FPS in which combat is centered around physics-based melee. The player takes on the role of a goblin, normally the lowest tier in the evil overlord's army. However, thanks to a single magic boot, this goblin has the chance to go from dungeon floor sweeper to one monster army, taking on the whole kingdom by itself. Everything in Glum is built around physics in some way, and specifically the physics of the protagonist's mighty foot. A kick will send the target flying, and the areas on display are full of gruesome traps in which to launch an unfortunate target. Ranged combat also plays a role, but hitting targets at range usually means kicking some object into them, with a skillful player able to shatter an object with one kick and then launch the shrapnel with a second. The magic boot is also a mobility tool, allowing the player to ascend surfaces with repeated, well-timed wall kicks. By the looks of it, Glum is definitely leaning into humor more than the rather serious game that inspired it, Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. It features a cartoony look with lots of crass visual jokes and over-the-top violence. This gives the game the style of an exceptionally gory Looney Tunes short, mingled with the humor of a typical Rockstar game. Much as its title suggests, Aloft is set in a skybound world comprised of floating islands. Now, all is not well here. Many of the islands have fallen to an intrusive, aggressive fungal infection that is forcing out all other forms of life. The objective is to restore ecological balance by defeating the fungal monsters, transplanting flora and fauna to restore biodiversity, and crafting antidotes to heal any enduring damage, all the while keeping an eye out for rare resources and ancient secrets. Now, as with many cozy-oriented games, Aloft is heavily focused on creativity. While the player has a glider that enables transport between islands, a more long-term goal is to transform one of those islands into an airship using a network of sails, turbines, and pulleys. Aside from transportation, these player-augmented islands also serve as bases of operations from which one can cultivate rare plants and animals and craft a wide range of goods. But as with any modern game, Aloft doesn't need to be a solo experience. It is planned to include 8-player co-op, allowing individual players to take their island ships into a shared world and hunt down the fungal corruption together. It's an interesting addition to a well-explored genre and style. It's the 1980s, but a different timeline. A nuclear accident has devastated large swaths of the United States, leaving many dead and even more struggling for life as society collapses all around them. Just as the night seemed darkest, the Phoenix Initiative revealed the REACH program, a new technology that promised to stop the death. but there are a lot of secrets surrounding Phoenix and Reach, not the least of which is that the Reach program has been transplanted into a human body, now headed out into the wasteland. Replaced is an action platformer that's all about spectacle. Gameplay is split into two modes. The first is a 2D brawler pitting the protagonist against waves of enemies in combo-based combat. The second is platforming, with the protagonist free climbing up various tall structures. Both modes are designed for spectacle, whether showing off impressive vistas or fluid dodges and blows. And really, all of this is just an excuse to show off the absolutely stunning visual design. Replace shows off a lot of features that we're not used to seeing in pixel-based games. Highly detailed lighting, subtle shadow effects, and some interesting tricks to simulate 3D when it's needed. Scenes can quickly shift from beautiful to terrifying as the protagonist explores the desolation. Add in an 80s-style dark synth soundtrack on top of this, and you have something that's just mind-blowing to behold. Pyrofauna follows a tiny animate spark birthed into a forest where such creatures are viewed as divine. Now that may seem paradoxical, but this particular forest is pyrogenic. It thrives after a fire, and thus the light from the spark is warm and inviting, not fearful. Taking control of the spark, the player will explore the woods and solve simple puzzles using the main character's ability to create and control flame. The aesthetics of Pyrofauna are what truly capture the imagination here. Tomáš Ostafin, the primary developer, was previously responsible for Papatur, and much like that game, the graphics in Pyrofauna are based on papercraft, but with some novel light effects based on the interplay between the fire and the sunlight breaking through the canopy above. The game's music is also interesting. Although only a few snippets have been revealed, it has a whimsical sound and seems like it changes dynamically based on the player's actions. Pyrofauna seems like it could bring some much-needed style to adventure games, but we'll have to wait and see as it's currently at a very early stage of development.